Alright, for today's industry insight, we got a very interesting one. While a lot of people are currently talking about Call of Duty and what's going on there are some possibly far more reaching concerns going on, especially for indie developers. And that's due to the ESRB, or Entertainment Service Ratings Board. If you've bought any major game in the last 20 plus years, you've probably seen their lovely little icon in the corner. And the ESRB has been a major part of the game rating system and a major proponent in terms of keeping game ratings and game censorship basically within the industry. But the news that was announced as of yesterday, or probably a few days by the time you're watching this recorded, is that the ESRB is removing one of their options in terms of how they rate games. And previously, or as it is now, there's two ways for the ESRB to review a game: the short form option and the long form. And the short form is basically the quicker way meant for smaller titles. And we'll be showing that off in a minute. But with them removing this removes a major way for developers to get their games rated. And for those of you who are new, especially students or first-timers, this is very important, especially if you want to try to get your game onto major platforms. But as a quick bit of history, the ESRB was founded in wake of the growing concerns about violence in the video game industry from the 90s, with the acts of Columbine, everybody's favorite lawyer Jack Thompson, and government hearings discussing regulating video games. So the ESRB kind of rose from that as the way for the game industry to self-police itself, and it has become a major part of the retail side of releasing a game. Similar to the FDA, you're not going to see any kind of food or perishable product in a supermarket without an FDA label on there. And as the analogy goes, you're not going to see a major game at GameStop, Walmart, Target, you name it, without having that ESRB rating label. And this is a major part of trying to legitimize these game ratings and to provide a one-stop source of information for any parents. Now, their efficiency or how successful they are, that's up for debate, because probably most people really don't review ratings. But they're still a very important part about designing a game. Publishers and developers in the past have been known to alter their game to get it to a specific rating. Because similar to the Motion Picture Association, it's easier to sell a movie that's TV-14 than it is a movie that's AO. But to talk more about this, we're going to go on a little trip, folks. So I'll see you all in a second. Alright, I am back down here for our little trip. But we are on the ESRB's website right now to talk a little bit about what they do and, again, what this process entails. But when it comes to the ESRB, the big part about them, again, are these lovely little stickers that you see on game boxes. Now, one thing to keep in mind, because I'm not a developer, I don't have access to the site, I can't give you 100% accurate information regarding how much it costs to use the ESRB. But the process basically remains usually universal between the ESRB and the various agencies around the world. The idea is that you're going to sign up for the website, you're going to fill out a questionnaire, as you can see right here, that basically lists all the major points about your game. You're not going to be talking about how your game plays or who your market is, but what's going to be in your game. Are you going to include graphic violence? Are you going to have religious imagery? Are you going to have, cute fluffy bunnies jumping around trying to find cake? But besides that, you're also going to include a video that contains typical gameplay and essentially what people are going to see. And a major part of that video is that whatever is the most graphic or the most extreme examples of your game must be included in that video. Because if there's one thing you don't want to do, is to try and cheat the ESRB or any rating board. such as sending them a video that is kind of like, this character just walks around, but we're going to ignore, the part when he walks into a building and starts shooting up zombies, or heads start flying off. And then what happens is you send this information to the ESRB. Ooh, my mouth just completely went out there. The ESRB, they will review it. Now, very important, most agencies do not play the video games. That's not their job. They're not there to tell whether your game is hard or easy, good or bad. Is it great Souls-like? Is it a PUBG clone? Nothing like that. They just want to know what kind of content is in your game to then be able to tell that to people. And that's the important part about the ESRB. And one of the things that, like, for myself, I understand their reverency. My mouth is still dry out here, but their importance, but why I don't really use them. For parents, they are, and as with the other agencies, a vital part of the game industry. Because you can't expect the consumer to do hardcore research. Same reason why we need the FDA. You're not going to go to the supermarket and instead of buying the food you need, just look at everything, run home, find their website, find the important details, take it back to the store, and then decide. That's the point of being able to provide this immediate and easy to understand information to the consumer. But for the people who are actually putting the games out, that's where things get very tricky, and where this bit of news comes into play. Now, again, without actually knowing a developer who's gone through the process, I can only go by second and third sources on this. But the point about the ESRB is that you have, again, the two options to do. You have the short form, and long form. Either way, you do need to sign up to the site, prove you are who you say you are, and be able to submit information that way. The long form is the one that requires a lot more information. It's typically used for games that are coming out in a few months. And you'll notice, and this is for if you've studied or know about developers who do the retail release, this is why it's usually important to get a gold master or some final version of your game done several months before publishing and printing out the game CDs. Because you have to submit this to the ESRB or to your respective agency and get them to review it. And this can take some time. Sometimes it could be a week, could be several weeks, depending upon how big the game is and what they currently have on their plate. But here's the big point, and this is what they don't tell you on the website, which I've been trying to find as we've been talking and before I started this. There is a cost to the ESRB, and this cost is based on the long form. That's basically having them sit down, review your work, have a panel look at it, and let them agree on what your rating is. The cost, this is the problem. I can't find a direct source of how much it is. Some people say that it can cost, thousands of dollars. Some say it depends on what your development budget was. One citing Giant Bomb listed something like if it's under $250,000, they only charge $800. If it's over $250,000, they charge like $11,000. But again, without knowing a developer who's done this, I can't give you the exact number here. But either way, there is a cost to it. Now, what we've shown so far is from the American side. If you're in another country, you may use PEGI. That's the Pan-European Game Information. And for us in the United States, if you've ever watched a trailer of an international game, you probably saw that brief blur that says PEGI 3, PEGI 13, PEGI 18, stuff like that. And that's what they're used for. And the important thing you have to understand is that for every basically region in the world that you are trying to release your game on a major platform, you must go through certification. The PEGI rating only applies to the Pan-European side. ESRB only is in the United States. So that means is that every area you're going to try to get into, it's going to cost you money for that certification. Now, For people, or probably for most of my fans who are on the PC side, especially indie developer side, you probably think, what's the big deal? And for most indie developers, it's not that big of a function. Sites like Steam, GOG, itch.io, they don't care about rating. As long as your game, fits their vetting or lack of vetting process, it can be put onto the store with or without this rating system. And that's one of the major attractors of the PC or independent side. However, if you are releasing your game on any major platform on the console side, PSN, XBLA, Nintendo Switch, stuff like that, they require a certification or a rating on your game, or they will not allow it on there. And if you notice, games like The Binding of Isaac did get rated when it was ported to Nintendo Switch. And this is where it can cause a lot of trouble for indie developers. Because it doesn't matter how great your game is if you don't have the money to apply for all these different certifications. And even then, you also have to worry about what if your game doesn't get the rating that your publisher or the console wants. Again, as we've said before, it's easier to sell games that have a lower rating than it is the higher ones. For instance, the recent news regarding visual novel games being removed from Steam, which that we'll have to cover probably on our next video, those kinds of games will not fly on a console. You can bet any amount of money that Nintendo is not going to allow an AO game on the Nintendo Switch in the near future. So, the point from the news article, and a growing option that still isn't quite there yet, is this. The International Age Rating Coalition. I'm not sure what we say. Do we say IARC or ARC? Whatever. Their job basically revolves around digital games. And they've been growing more and more popular, especially with the rise of digital titles. This is again one of the reasons why the ESRB and PEGI sometimes have these long waiting periods. Because if there's dozens of games being released on a day-to-day basis and they're all trying to get certification, it's going to take time for that. So the IARC is basically a streamlined way to do that. They basically partner with the major groups, and for those of you who are indie developers right now, within these respective areas, you may want to take some notes here. Because if you're going to try to get your game onto a major platform, you're going to probably have to deal with these people. But how they work and what's different is that instead of having to fill all kinds of information and send them footage and pay money, what you do is simply sign up, submit your game, put these questions on. They will look at basically taking the information that you submit them. They're going to correlate that with the respective agency. So if you're in the United States, ESRB. If you're in Europe, it'll be PEGI, and so on and so forth. And what we'll do is assign you a rating. And here's the best part. It's free to use the IARC. The only caveat, though, is that it must be a digital game. That means like games like God of War, State of Decay. If it's a retail release, you cannot use IARC. But there is another issue, and this goes back to this article or this news piece from Gamma Sutra and what's being reported, is that despite the IARC being used by major storefronts like Nintendo, Google, and so on, not everybody recognizes it yet. So right now, PlayStation is not available. And again, if we come back over here, where was it? Here we go. As you can see, right now, these are the only storefronts that accept the IARC. So if you're trying to release your game on PSN or XBLA, you're out of luck. And this is what has a lot of people very concerned about the ESRB and what this could mean going forward, especially for smaller developers. But we'll switch back over to the big screen to wrap things up. When it comes to these rating systems and the various agencies, despite what you may or may not think about their usefulness, they still serve a major purpose, and it's something that you cannot ignore, whether you are an indie developer or a major studio. Now, as we said in the last part, even if your game is only meant for digital releases and you can use the IARC, if you're trying to go for a major platform like PSN or XBLA that doesn't support it, your only options are to go through the actual agencies. And that cost can add up because, again, you have to do it for each region that you want your game to be in. And obviously, as anyone will tell you, you don't just want to limit your game and say, only people in the United States can buy my video game. And this is why these kinds of costs can get out of control, because it's not just for one. If you remember from what we just showed you on the IARC page, there are at least, they have, in terms of participants, 6 major groups. And again, each group you will have to deal with if you want to get your game to those different countries. And the costs will escalate or fluctuate depending upon who you're going to reach. So without having the short form option, or without the IARC having more reach, this could be a serious detriment to any developers. Because if you're already having trouble selling your game in one country, you're going to have to bite the bullet and spend the money to get it right in another one and hope that that will get people interested. And again, these costs can add up. Now, what people are hoping for is that as the IARC becomes more of a standard option, maybe they'll be able to get that pool with PSN, XBLA, and so on to just allow that to work. But that does raise one final point that's kind of in the back of my mind about this. One of the biggest differences between the IARC and the reviewing agencies is that the IARC does not really review your game. You're giving them information, yes, and they're trusting you to be accurate. But what makes the ESRB and PEGI and the other ones kind of be that gold standard is the fact that when you submit your game to them, you are having a panel review it. This is why the major storefronts are very keen about getting that little rating on their sticker or on their box, because it's that proof. It's the same thing as the FDA label, as we've talked about. Who are you going to trust to properly review your game? The developer trying to make money, or a third-party agency? But with that said, as we just said, the third-party agencies are also getting money for doing this. And it's one of those cases of, I guess, what is the lesser of two evils? Do you want to deal with the ESRB, or do you want to deal with the IARC? And chances are most developers are going to want to do the latter because it's free. But with growing concerns about gambling in video games, loot boxes, the ever-popular violence in video games argument, these kinds of issues are going to come back. And one thing that we have to be worried about, like we said earlier, if the developer lies about their game, the ESRB is going to come down harshly on them. But doing a quick look at the IARC site, I'm not seeing any provisions in place about what happens if I submit, completely inaccurate information just to get that rating and they find out about it later. Because all it's going to take is for some less than reputable developers to try and skirt the system, and that can throw any trust that the IRC has built out the window. And when that happens, developers may have no choice but to go back to these agencies and spend that money. But for right now, though, it's still a little too soon to tell, and we're hoping that in the next few months we'll get official words from the ESRB and hopefully from the IRC as being legitimate sources or legitimate resources regardless of where you're at in the world and your company's stature. But with that said, thank you so much for watching today's Industry Insight. Be sure to check back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, have a great day. Before we get to the credits, just want to give a quick shout out to the fans and supporters over on patreon.com/GWBycer. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. If you'd like to suggest games for me to cover or topics to talk about, let me know in the comments below. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on design, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the Game Wisdom Patreon, you can find us on there on patreon.com/gwbycer. $1 will get you into our private Discord channel where we talk game topics and more. $5 will get you voting privileges for any major event, including the Saturday Night Grab Bag, Patreon-funded goals, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy more videos here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.